And Pratik, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you, Shelley. Welcome to Tech Talk with Pratik. Hybrid cloud is one of those topics that I get asked about all the time because my partners are seeing that their clients are really looking for guidance, on the best solutions in the environment, and that's really where Microsoft comes in. Microsoft Azure is really leading the way by modernizing infrastructure, boosting performance, cutting costs, and seamlessly bridging on-prem and cloud environments. I'm your host, Pratik Patel, and today we're discussing a game changer in hybrid cloud solutions, Microsoft Azure. In this episode, we'll break down why enterprises are adopting hybrid cloud strategies, how Microsoft Azure really stacks up against traditional virtualization, and how it seamlessly integrates modern infrastructure to really take hybrid operations to that next level. But before we dive into the main topic here, give me 1 second here. We'll have some exciting opportunity for you. If you're looking to really sharpen your skills and even upgrade your Lenovo tier status, I want to invite you to an upcoming Lenovo accreditation bootcamp we're holding in San Jose. It's really designed to give you all the tools you need to get Lenovo certified. If you want to attend, please email me after this event, and I'll provide all the registration information you need. Okay, so now let's get into it. Today, I want to welcome Eric Mills and Austin Fries. They're both work closely with enterprises to really help leverage Microsoft Azure solutions. Let me hand it off to Austin to start the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So just a quick introduction, guys. My name is Austin Fries. I am a Azure Local Business Development Manager at Lenovo. I've been here a little over 6 months, but like we were mentioning, I have the Azure Local conversations all the time, all the standard questions that customers have about moving off of Broadcom and different scenarios that they go through. So excited to kind of have this conversation with you guys and hear what your feedback, what your questions are going forward. I'm going to pass it over to Eric, and we'll kind of dive into some of the content.
Awesome. Thank you, Austin. I am working on sharing my screen here. All right, hopefully everybody can see that okay. Hey everybody, I am Eric Mills from Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft about 14 years. I look after the Lenovo server and cloud business at the worldwide level. And I'm thrilled today to be chatting with you about hybrid solutions from Lenovo and Microsoft. I probably have about 20 or 30 minutes of content and happy to take questions at the end. We should have plenty of time for questions. I'm not able to see the chat as I'm presenting, so I may miss it during the presentation, but with help from the team, I'm sure we can get questions answered, and anything we can't answer between Austin, Pratik, and I, we can follow up afterwards. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let's get started. All right, so you may have heard of Azure from Microsoft. It's our public cloud offering, and you may have heard that Microsoft has some on-prem operating systems as well, something like Windows Server. But these days people are often thinking about Microsoft mostly as a cloud company, and that's okay. But I am here to assure you that we have not left the on-prem world behind. We've been working very closely with Lenovo for a long time to build out solutions that offer customers from small to large, from edge to data center to cloud offerings that will fit into their daily work operations and help optimize their business. So it's not just about cloud. We're going to be talking about hybrid cloud and a lot of on-prem talk today. I hope that's okay. So as you know, there are many workloads that may never move to the cloud. And so some people who sell just the cloud may say everything is going to move to the cloud, and maybe someday. But today there are a lot of workloads that are they're just better on-prem. So some of those workloads are local AI inferencing, especially video. Video it's too big to send everything to the cloud for processing and inferencing and analysis. What you want to do is do that processing and analysis and inferencing on-prem, and then send the insights up to the cloud, right? So that's why you need on-prem hardware for that. Secondly, mission critical business continuity. If you need to be able to continue operations, if your internet goes down, if your power grid goes down, if you still need to be able to process, if that downtime is too expensive, which it is for a lot of people, you still need on-prem hardware for that. Control systems and near real-time systems. We see this a lot in manufacturing where latency is key. We don't have time to go from on-prem up to the cloud and back again. It's just better to process everything locally. You have the information. You can make the decisions quickly without, all the bandwidth and long distance travels and all that. So if you need low latency, snappy response times, you need on-prem hardware. Then, of course, regulatory compliance reasons to stay on-prem. If your government or local agency requires you to have your data specifically on-prem or your entire workload and servers and everything on-prem, we're always going to have those in the world. So what we're seeing is, hey, there's still a lot of reasons to keep things on-prem. And fortunately, we have a lot of options for you. I'm going to be talking a lot about Azure Local and Azure Arc today. And I want to make sure that I'm clear about the mission here. So the mission with Azure Local and Azure Arc is to deliver the best of Azure to our customers on their servers that they control with their preferred tools on their premises. So hopefully that says it very clearly about the target of this conversation. It's not just about on-prem hardware standing alone, but it's about on-prem hardware talking with the cloud to give really customers the best of all worlds, both the on-prem and the cloud world. So like I said, a lot of people still think of Microsoft just as a cloud company, but Gartner recently recognized Microsoft in their Magic Quadrant for distributed hybrid infrastructure. So because we have a long-standing history of being, IT pros OS of choice on-prem for a long, long time, we continue that legacy with our hybrid tools. So you may have heard of Azure Stack HCI, and you may have seen this document or this slide. This talks about how you can take legacy 3-tier infrastructure that includes dedicated storage devices, dedicated compute devices, and dedicated network devices. And you can move them into a HCI configuration, which is a hyper-converged configuration. This is a better way to organize your on-prem infrastructure. You virtualize your network, you virtualize your compute, you virtualize your storage, and you put all three across every node. And because each node is a industry standard server, like an SR650, you don't have these proprietary, expensive, separate OSs to maintain and pay for. So you save a lot of money by moving from legacy 3-tier infrastructure to HCI infrastructure. Once everything is virtualized, you have a massive advantage over someone that has the 3-tier infrastructure, because when you need more compute or storage or networking, you just add another node and the software spreads the workload across the servers in the pool or the cluster. So this is, basically HCI, and it's where, HCI companies have built their business. Now, you may be asking now, what's the difference between Azure Stack HCI and Azure Local? And we're going to get there. But I just want to make sure everybody understands and has a baseline understanding of how HCI is a better way to organize your infrastructure. Now, the problem with HCI is it often takes a fairly robust set of servers in order to virtualize the storage and the compute and the networking. And so at Microsoft Ignite back in November in Chicago, Microsoft introduced Azure Local. And Azure Local subsumes Azure Stack HCI. It's Azure Stack HCI and more. So, one of the problems with HCI, as I mentioned, the robust hardware that's required. And in a lot of cases, that robustness is not needed, and customers are looking for a less expensive way to get the benefits of HCI without the expensive servers. And so Azure Local is introduced as a way to add more flexibility to Azure Stack HCI and to help customers rethink how they are deploying their workloads on hybrid infrastructure. So we're going to go through Azure Local in a little bit more detail here. We're not going to get too deep, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that it is a mind shift from Azure Stack HCI. You may have thought of Azure Stack HCI as a better way to, just organize your on-prem infrastructure, and that's true. But with Azure Local, the way I want you to think about it is it's actually an extension of the cloud into on-prem. Okay, and I'll talk more about that later. So when I talk about low spec, low cost options that don't necessarily need all the robustness of a full 2U, 2-proc standard data center server, you can see something like the Lenovo ThinkEdge SE350 V2. Which is an awesome compute device. Microsoft has been super interested in all the use cases for these edge servers, and Lenovo has an amazing array of different sized edge servers depending on your needs. At the edge, we don't always have a 19-inch rack to put our servers into, and we don't always have all the cooling and the noise protection and all that. So Lenovo's got this nice portfolio of from tiny all the way up to data center servers to let you really choose what server best fits your needs. So if you need a low noise server, they've got that. If you need one that could be stuck on the side of a desk or mounted on the wall, they've got that. If you need something that could be connected to the the cellular network instead of the Wi-Fi network, they've got that. Lenovo has really pushed the boundaries of where we can put these servers. And, in addition to that, they've upped the security of these physical servers, because if it's not in the data center, if it's out mounted to a wall somewhere, you may be thinking, well, what if somebody just steals that thing? What if they break into it? How do we protect the data? How do we make sure things are still secure out on the edge where we don't control physical security as much? And Lenovo's done some really nice work with being able to make these devices tamper-proof and being able to make sure that they are physically secure, that if somebody breaks open that case, that those drives encrypt to protect the data. So we're really excited about the different edge use cases that Lenovo is making servers for. And with the Azure Local operating system, now we can put this operating system on basically lower spec servers than we've ever been able to before. And some people just want a low-cost solution. They may have 1,000 locations where they want to put this thing, and so cost really matters. And Lenovo's made it really nice for customers because they can choose essentially how much security do they need, how much redundancy do they need. Do they need a single node? Do they need 2 nodes? Do they need 3 nodes? How much redundancy do we need out at that edge, and what are we willing to pay? And so with the hardware options from Lenovo and the software options from Microsoft, we're really able to give customers exactly what they want, what they need, and the amount of cost, the amount of redundancy, and the amount of security that they need. So you can see in the table on the left how Azure Local is reducing the hardware requirements for these devices so that we can get more servers out into the world doing the work that servers do. All right, let's move on and talk a little bit more about Azure Local itself. What is it? Well, at its core, it's a host operating system. It sits right on top of the bare metal. Okay, so there's nothing in between the bare metal and Azure Local. It's a host OS. And on that host OS is where you can add your guest OSs, your virtual machines, your containers, whether they're Windows Server virtual machines or Linux virtual machines. They ride on top of Azure Local, and Azure Local gives you that baseline infrastructure level to manage your VMs, manage your containers, manage your workloads, and communicate across servers to be sure that the workloads whether it be compute, network, or storage, are spread properly across the servers to optimize performance. Okay, so as I mentioned, the right way to think about an Azure local node is an extension of Azure, right? When you bring an Azure local server online, it's going to connect to Azure. It must connect to Azure, right? Azure local has to be connected with one exception that I'll cover in just a minute. But generally speaking, Azure local has to be connected. And so as an extension of Azure, customers are able to use the Azure portal to manage their Azure local servers. And, customers who know Azure and like Azure, they like using the portal. It's basically become the operating system for the cloud. And now people know it. They know how to use it. They've got their templates built. They've got their policies built. They've got their resources grouped properly. They've got their scripts written. They have a system for managing their cloud infrastructure. And now they can use that same system, that same portal, to manage their on-prem infrastructure. So if you have a customer or you are a customer that uses Azure already, this is going to easily fit into what they do on a normal day-to-day basis. And that's really the right way to think about Azure Local. You can also deploy it from the Azure portal. There are some short videos from Microsoft showing how easy it is to deploy new nodes of Azure Local and have them connect to the Azure cloud. And the idea is to make it easier to deploy by taking the responsibility and the knowledge required from the on-site person and putting that at the cloud person. And so if you plan in advance, it makes it much easier to deploy Azure local nodes out into hundreds or thousands of locations and do it from the cloud, manage it from the cloud, ensure that the right workloads are on each node, the right policies are on each node, the right updates are on each node, right? This is for scalable infrastructure that you want to be managed from the cloud. Yes, you can do it for one or two nodes. That's fine. But it's really built to be able to scale across lots of different locations if you really want that one central place to see everything, to manage everything, to make sure it's consistent, make sure that it's optimized, monitoring, updates, everything from one central location, which is the Azure portal. That's what Azure Local is. So it really looks just like a cloud server or a cloud virtual machine to Azure portal. It just happens to be on-prem. And so we're getting into a new era where Azure is no longer just a place. We traditionally think Azure's a cloud, but really Azure is now a platform. It's a way of doing things. I manage this on-prem infrastructure through Azure, through my Azure portal. It's consistent. My cloud infrastructure and my on-prem infrastructure are consistent. And once you wrap your mind around the benefits of that, it's hard to think about doing things any other way. Now, we've still got Windows Server. If you just want to run a Windows Server 2025 Lenovo server on-prem, put your virtual machines on it, you can do that. And you can still do clusters and get all the benefits. This doesn't take away anything from the options that we've always had to run your workloads on-prem. This is just another way to do it, right? So you connect your Azure portal to your on-prem infrastructure using Azure Arc. That's essentially just an agent that runs on your on-prem infrastructure that allows it to connect to the cloud and provides all the benefits that I spoke about earlier.
So Eric, quick question.
Yep.
So does that platform require a license or anything like that? Or is there any kind of limitation that, like you said, that comes with using that one instead of the Windows system?
So yes, it requires a license, and I have a few slides on licensing that I will cover shortly. So let's hold on the licensing stuff. Are there limitations? Yes, of course there are limitations. And And I'm speaking of limitations as compared to maybe a traditional Windows server. For one, it's required to be connected to Azure. So for most scenarios, if you need a completely air-gapped server, then Azure Local is not going to be the best fit. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. There are some scenarios where disconnected is possible, but for most people, the connected requirement is, that's a big thing you have to consider. The other limitation is you're managing it from Azure, right? And so if you don't know how to use the Azure portal, you may struggle with that. And like I said, the Azure portal's super popular, and people, generally speaking, love it. But if you've never used it before and you're accustomed to just using a Windows Server GUI to manage your server, you have a lot to learn in order to be able to manage that server like it's a cloud resource. So I would say maybe not a limitation, but something that you need to consider. You're typically not going to use traditional on-prem management tools like Virtual Machine Manager or System Center, Operations Manager, or something like that. You're not going to use those tools to manage Azure Local. So if you have I would say a robust on-prem management tool today, like System Center, Azure Local is probably not going to fit into that management paradigm. If that's your scenario, you're probably better off sticking with Windows Server and managing it, through all the different ways that you can manage Windows Server. So yeah, I guess those are the key limitations. One, you got to be connected to Azure. Two, it's got to be managed from Azure. There aren't too many other limitations. There's some more differences that I'll cover, but I wouldn't call them limitations. Okay, let's jump back in. We will have lots of time for more Q&A at the end. Why do people buy servers? It's not because they want servers. It's because they need to run the workloads. And those workloads sit in virtual machines or containers. And so you can put your virtual machine, whether it's a Windows Server-based virtual machine or a Linux-based virtual machine, any distro of Linux that's supported on Hyper-V is actually supported on Azure Local. So, virtual machines are fine. You can have Windows Server and Linux VMs running side by side, all on the same server or the same cluster, no problem. Same goes for containers. You can have your Windows-based containers, you can have your Linux-based containers. Those can run on top of your Azure Local instance as well, and those can coincide with no problems. This does come with a lot of robust tools for managing your virtual machines, managing your containers. You will get, everything that you're accustomed to in Azure, as well as you'll get AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, which is a robust tool for managing your containers and just, managing uptime and migrations and that kind of thing. Speaking of migrations, there is a tool from Microsoft called Azure Migrate, and it has some new functionality that's in public preview right now, which allows you to migrate your VMs from VMware to Azure Local on-prem. So if you're interested in checking this tool out, it's called Azure Migrate, and it does the full migration for you, and it's free. So be sure to check that out. It is fairly new and still in public preview, so not GA. You probably don't want to use it to move your production workloads yet, but you can at least do some test migrations, see how it works for you. And yeah, we get a lot of questions about this because people really want to know what their options are for moving away from VMware on-prem. We also have VMware solutions in Azure, but if you want to keep it on-prem, then this is the tool that you want. You want this VMware to Azure Local migration tool, Azure Migrate. And this is the Azure Kubernetes service that I was describing earlier, just the way to manage your containers on-prem. Your Azure Local license, which I'm about to cover, does include AKS licenses as well. It's built in, it's included. Couple more things. Okay, a lot of people are interested in AI. They want to know, what can I do with AI on-prem. And as you may know, there's a ton of AI tools in Azure, in the cloud. But now with Azure Local, you're able to bring some of those cloud applications on-prem. So this is also in preview, but if you want to do local AI search, or you want to bring your Azure machine learning models from the cloud using Azure ML Studio, you can bring them on-prem to sit on top of Azure Local and run. So these are a couple of new features that were just announced at Ignite back in November. But these are available in preview now if you want to do local search, or if you want to bring your AI models that you build in Azure and run them on-prem, you can do that with Azure Local. You can't do this with Windows Server. So if you think about, I talked about what are the limitations of Azure Local versus Windows Server. There are a few, but there are also some benefits of Azure Local over Windows Server. Some things that you can do with Azure Local you can't do with Windows Server. This is an example of that. Azure Local is all about bringing the applications and the management from Azure Cloud to on-prem. So more and more, you will see the capabilities of Azure being able to be brought on-prem. We also see it with AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop, and we see it with SQL Server managed instances. So if you use either of those in Azure, you can also run those workloads on-prem, sitting on top of Azure Local, still managed from Azure, managed from the same control plane. And think about the flexibility and the power that that gives you to be able to look at your workload and say, these are running on-prem, these are running in the cloud, and that's how things are today. But if my business changes over time, if somehow I need to make some changes to that because people are relocating or we're acquiring another company, the flexibility that this hybrid cloud infrastructure gives you is unprecedented. To be able to have your virtual desktop running on-prem close to the user where they get that snappy response, that low latency. And then if that user moves to another location or goes on a trip, now we can move that desktop to the cloud and get the benefits of that. So just the power and the flexibility that this hybrid infrastructure gives you is the best of all worlds. And now that we can manage it all from one place, this gives really what I would say is an unprecedented level of flexibility and agility for an IT pro to manage the infrastructure and respond to the business changes as necessary to give the end users the best possible experience. Finally, we get to licensing. Is there a licensing fee for this? Absolutely. We'll start with the simple version. Okay, so Azure Local costs $10 per physical core per month. This does not include the guest OS. This does not include any other Azure charges like data storage or VPN setup or any other Azure charges. Doesn't include your guest operating system if you need Windows Server guest operating systems. If you just want to buy Azure Local, it's $10 per core per month. Fairly straightforward. You can see the green line in the table there. They're trying to show how the physical cores don't change. You may have virtual machines that get more virtual CPUs assigned to them or less virtual CPUs assigned to them. This is all about the physical cores and the physical processors. So it's just $10 per core per month. That's the simple version. But of course, we can't leave things just at that. We have to complicate it a little bit. So let me go through a few scenarios here. So in the first scenario, we've got some Linux applications that we want to run. So what do we need to buy in order to do that? Well, we need to buy some Lenovo hardware, first of all, and then we need to buy that Azure Local license. Maybe that's $10 per core per month. And that's really all that needs to be paid to Microsoft for licensing. So, you can run Linux VMs and Linux containers without paying Microsoft anything. You just have to buy that Azure Local license. If you have some Windows Server applications that you want to run, in the second scenario there, you buy your hardware, you buy your Azure Local license, and then you need to buy your guest virtual machines. And so with Windows Server Standard Edition, you get 2 Windows Server virtual machines. that's not going to get you very far on the types of servers that Lenovo makes available these days. But if you did have just a single workload or a couple of workloads, and you didn't really care too much about redundancy or anything like that, if you're not doing anything fancy, you could just have Windows Server Standard 2025, and you would assign it to that hardware from Lenovo, and that would allow you to run 2 Windows Server virtual machines on that Azure local server. Now, for most people that are actually virtualizing, they will want a lot more than 2 virtual machines. And so they would buy the data center edition of Windows Server, and that's licensed by the core. So, depending on how many cores you have in your server, you would buy the correct number of data center licenses, and that would allow you to run an unlimited number of Windows Server virtual machines on top of Azure Local, on top of your OEM hardware. And then the last scenario, you can also buy the Windows Server subscription license for your guest virtual machines if you want to do that. I'm going to pause right here and open it up for questions. I think I saw a hand pop up, and I know that licensing generates a ton of questions. So let me open it up here and just see.
I'm not seeing a question in the chat,
Okay.
but that just means, yeah,
Okay.
I think we're good. We're good
No
at the
problem.
moment.
I will keep going, and we can take questions, more questions at the end. Before I get to that, let me just say there are a couple more ways to buy the Azure local license besides this $10 per core per month option. One of those options is to buy a Windows Server data center license and add software assurance. So if you already own a Windows Server data center license and you already own software assurance for that license, then you are allowed to run Azure Local on that server. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, if all of this is super confusing, or if you don't like subscriptions, like a lot of people, Lenovo has an awesome option that is a one-time perpetual license for both Azure Local and Windows Server Data Center. Okay, so if you're a Windows shop and you like to run a bunch of virtual machines, like most people do, and you're not so big on $10 per core per month, because over time, if you calculate that over the life of a server, that can be pretty expensive. You should ask Lenovo about their perpetual Azure local license. So like I said, that's going to be a one-time charge for Azure Local that allows you to run Azure Local on that server for the life of the server with no extra subscription charges. It also gives you Windows Server Data Center Edition. So that's going to give you unlimited Windows Server virtual machines on that server for the life of a server. So, there's a subscription option if you like that. There's a perpetual one-time license if you like that. Lenovo can sell both of those. Any CSP can sell you the $10 per core per month. And so, any Microsoft CSP partner can sell that. The perpetual license that I mentioned is only available from select OEMs like Lenovo. So if you calculate the ROI over the long term, that's often the less expensive way to go. But however you want to do it, there are options available. Just a little bit more info here. There's something online called a Azure Local catalog. Now, hardware is really important to Azure Local. This hardware is not just any hardware. It's not just something you have sitting in your data center. Lenovo has partnered with Microsoft, and our engineering teams have done a ton of joint work, testing, and validation together to make sure that customers get the best experience on Azure Local. And so Lenovo is required to validate their hardware through this Microsoft Azure Local catalog. And if you go to the Azure Local catalog, you will see that Lenovo has done an outstanding job of giving customers a ton of choice in what type of server they want, what form factor, as well as what solution categories that they want. So, depending on your budget and your requirements, you can find the right server that you want. Lenovo's one of only 2 companies that has certified their hardware into the Premier Solution category. This is the highest level category that gives customers the best experience. It's gone through the most amount of testing and rigorous validation to ensure easy deployment, easy management, and easy lifecycle management for the life of that server. So, thank you to Lenovo for being such a good partner to Microsoft to validate so many different form factors. The 2U, 2Proc, all the way down to the tiny edge servers, they're all in this Azure Local catalog. There's also something called the Azure Local Sizer. And if you want to know how much hardware do I need for my workloads, you can use that Azure Local Sizer, and it will tell you how many nodes you need. You can put in, how many virtual machines you're going to run and how many virtual CPUs are assigned to each virtual machine and what's the workload going to be on this virtual machine. And it will give you an excellent idea of how many nodes that you would need to buy in order to support that scenario. So a lot of really good tools available from Microsoft and Lenovo to help you size and help you, give you a lot of choices on what hardware that you want to use. And almost one last thing, two more things. There was a new scenario announced for Azure Local, which is called the disconnected scenario. It is in private preview right now, so not available, but it will be available to a very small select group of servers that have been certified into that premier category that I showed on the previous slide. So like I showed here, Lenovo has both the MX650 v3 and the MX455 v3 in the premier category. So servers in the premier category qualify for this disconnected scenario. And so if you do want the benefits of Azure Local, such as portal management, lifecycle management, easy deployment, but you need a disconnected scenario, you will be able to do that soon with Azure Local, as long as you're choosing a server that is in the premier category. And right now it's that 650 and the 455. There is some extra overhead associated with the disconnected scenario of Azure Local. It essentially gives you an on-prem version of the Azure portal to manage your on-prem infrastructure. So we've replicated the required functionality of the Azure portal to run locally to manage servers in that disconnected scenario. And at the beginning, I showed 4 different scenarios where customers are going to be using on-prem servers for a long time. And many of those servers need to be disconnected. I can tell you that when I was at Ignite and we announced this, there was a ton of interest from customers coming up to the Lenovo booth asking, what is this disconnected scenario? How do I qualify for that? How does that work? So if you really need disconnected, you can still use Azure Local as long as it's on one of those premier category solutions that I mentioned previously. Okay, last slide for me, and then we'll open up for questions here. If you want to learn more about all of this, you can go to the Lenovo Sales Portal at lenovosalesportal.com. There is a ton of information there, videos, PowerPoints, white papers. There's a licensing calculator. There's a part number sheet. There's everything that you will need to figure out, which version of Azure Local you need, what part numbers you need, what you need to buy. So that's lenovosalesportal.com. And that's it for me. I'm finished. And I'll turn it back over to Pratik, and we can open it up for questions.
So if you have any questions specific to anything that was discussed today, definitely put it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, I know that's kind of being brave, but definitely, if you're up to that challenge, you can do that as well. Okay. So then one question came in. What are some of the reasons to use Azure Local in a disconnected mode versus Windows Admin Center?
Well, I wouldn't use Azure Local in a disconnected mode unless I needed it. If you need disconnected, the difference between Azure Local and Windows Admin Center is your management tool primarily, right? Windows Admin Center is a kind of a lightweight management tool that runs in a browser. The Azure portal that's going to run on-prem with a disconnected scenario is going to be much more robust. It's going to give you tools from the Azure portal to manage your infrastructure. So if you have scripts, if you've got your servers grouped into, certain resource groups, if you are accustomed to using Azure portal, then you're going to want to use Azure Local in a disconnected scenario over Windows Admin Center. Now, if you're accustomed to using Windows Admin Center and you don't need any of the resource groups or the update manager, the monitoring, or the security defender stuff from Azure, if you don't need any of that stuff, you can continue to use Windows Admin Center to manage your Azure Stack HCI in a disconnected scenario. Cool. Thanks, Colin. All right, what other questions do we have?
Let me ask a question this way. Are there any questions that, that usually get asked by, by channel partners or, customers that you think that, be relevant at this point?
Sorry, that was a question for me, wasn't it, Pratik?
Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I'm just trying to say, is there anything that you might have not discussed right now, in the presentation, but you think that's relevant to, something that, like a lot of your partners kind of, customers might be asking specifically for Azure Local?
I think there's been a lot of confusion by customers about what this thing is, which is why I really tried to start the conversation from a very basic level. There's confusion about, what's the difference between Azure Local and Azure Stack HCI. There's confusion about what's the difference between Azure Local and Windows Server, right? And so, part of the problem here is Microsoft and Lenovo are giving customers more options. And with those options comes a little bit of confusion. We're not taking anything away, but with the more options, now people go into a little deeper analysis about what tool is best for them. For example, the question that we just got about Azure Local and disconnected node versus Windows Admin Center, right? These are fundamental questions that people need to understand. And Microsoft is not always the easiest company to understand, both from a technology standpoint and from a licensing standpoint. So that's why I really tried to focus on the fundamentals there. I think the key things to remember are, Azure Local is a host operating system, just like Azure Stack HCI was a host operating system. Your guest operating systems are still going to be Windows Server and Linux, and you can run any application in those guest virtual machines that you could run on Windows Server, whether that's on-prem, physical, virtual. Windows Server Guest OS is a Windows Server Guest OS, and it's going to support your workload. For those people moving into containers, Azure Kubernetes Services gives you a ton of flexibility and power, and it's now included with the Azure Local license, no extra charge. So that can save customers a lot of money. And the difference between Azure Stack HCI and Azure Local is essentially, they're very similar, but Azure Stack HCI is basically now a part of Azure Local. And so you won't really hear Microsoft talking about Azure Stack HCI anymore. That technology is all moved into Azure Local, and then it's been expanded. It's been expanded to include these low-cost servers that people want to drop in the edge in their retail environments and their manufacturing environments. It's been expanded also into the data center, so that if people want to migrate their VMware onto Azure Local using our migration tool, they can do that. And it's really been pivoted so that your Azure Local server is an extension of the cloud onto your on-prem. And if you think about it that way, it's incredibly empowering because you've now got the power of the Azure portal while you get all the benefits of your Lenovo hardware on-prem. And the flexibility and the power, the agility that provides just can't be overstated. That's really the holy grail of where I think IT departments need to get to. So I get a lot of questions about that. When does it make sense to put your server on-prem versus use cloud infrastructure? Is cloud always cheaper? Is on-prem always cheaper? The prices for these things are changing all the time, and the technology is changing all the time. But Lenovo is stocked full of experts that can help you have these conversations and guide you toward, the right solution that's for you, whether it's Windows Server on-prem, Azure Local on-prem, Azure in the cloud, or most likely a combination of, hybrid cloud infrastructure that's going to give you all those benefits. Long answer.
Yeah, but that was perfect. Yep, I appreciate that. If there are no more questions, I want to, thank Eric for, coming on. This was fantastic. Thank you for sharing this information. Every time I hear this, I think it sinks in a little bit deeper and deeper. So definitely appreciate that end of it. All right. That's
You're
a
welcome.
wrap for today's episode. Give me 1 second here. We unpacked a lot of stuff today, but my main thing here is if you have any questions, you have a whole team behind you. Ingram Micro, Lenovo, Microsoft, everyone is there to really help you. So the way I kind of look at it is here's my call to action to you. If you need help with a bomb, a quote, an opportunity, or just want to know how other channel partners are really selling Lenovo, Microsoft. Nate just put the email in the chat. It's lenovo.servers@ingrammicro.com, and we can help you get to the right resources. So definitely, keep that in mind whenever you have an opportunity for anything, or you just have a question, you need a friend to talk to, definitely that's your email to go with. And then I'm going to put the link registration in for March's Tech Talk. It's a little bit early, but definitely, you want to register so you don't forget. I just want to say, thank you to my panelists for joining. Thank you to all for attending. Let's make it a terrific Tuesday. Until next time, goodbye for now.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.